and a very warm welcome to our 43rd Security Thought Leadership webinar. And this is where every Tuesday and Thursday, and some other days too, we were here on Saturday, for example, we've been running a webinar to examine some issue of topical debate in the security sector. And the idea of thought leadership is the quality of critique we give today affects the type of security we get tomorrow. That's why thought leadership is so important. And today, our topic is going to be about maximising the potential of big data and protecting people's privacy, the challenges for the security sector. And you will have heard from previous webinars about, on the one hand, the enormous potential of big data. It's sometimes presented as an unqualified good. And yet, on the other hand, we've been hearing about the concerns about mis-selling, the concerns about keeping it updated, the concerns about privacy, to name just a few. I've once again invited an expert panel from different parts of expertise, all of whom in different ways have influenced this choice. And I'm particularly grateful to Bidvest Noonan for sponsoring this webinar. They've shown a lot of interest in this subject and sponsoring thought leadership. So my grateful thanks to them, and indeed all our supporters for their part in it. Once again, I'm going to invite each of our panelists to just introduce themselves. And once they've done that, I will ask each of them for their opening statement. Meanwhile, can I invite you, the audience, to use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen to ask questions, and we'll endeavour to get to them throughout the webinar. Without further ado, let's go through then and invite each of the panelists to introduce themselves, starting first with you, Steve.
So, hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Steve Elliott. I'm the Managing Director for LexisNexis Risk Solutions, running their business units in UK and Ireland.
Thank you very much, Steve. And then over to the United States, and Mike.
Hello, I'm Mike Anderson from Colorado. I'm a Senior Program Manager with Microsoft, working in the Global Security, Physical Security Program at Microsoft.
Thank you very indeed, Mike. And James.
Hello, everyone. I'm James Willison. I'm founder of Unified Security. I work with VidSys, which is a leading software that looks at AI and data, so that's quite relevant. And also I'm co-vice chair with Saab Sembi on the Internet of Things Security Foundation, another relevant organisation on this subject.
Thank you very much, James. And finally, Mark.
Hi, everyone. Mark Hobden. I'm the Director of Operations Support at Bidvest Noonan. I'm by no means an expert on big data, but I am very keen and have a reasonable good knowledge of data protection, especially how it relates to the industry I'm in, which is manned guarding.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. So let's now go to each of our panelists once again and invite them to make their opening statement. 3 minutes when they've got the opportunity to say what they think about this topic. Steve, your opening statement, please.
Okay, so I'll try to keep to the 3 minutes, which for me will be a first, but I will manage it. So for me, when we go into conversations like this, it's critical that we understand what we're talking about. Big data, personal privacy, and all related issues can mean different things to different people. So essential that we understand what we're talking about. We use common definitions, because an issue like this is actually a very emotional issue. People have different views on both ends of it, depending on their own personal experiences, their political preferences, their commercial experiences, and so on and so on. So absolutely critical that we make sure that we're talking about the right thing when we're debating it. In relation to data, what does it mean for us? Personal data means a whole range of things. It means physical data attributes, understanding your name, your address, your date of birth. It means your digital attributes, the device you use, how you use it, when you use it. It means your behavioral attributes, for example, how you hold the device. And I'll come back to that a little bit later, but really exciting when you blend some of those together, because it gives you certainty about who an individual is, who the network is that they connect with, and how risky they are. And it's that network really that's fascinating, because it's opening up opportunities to truly understand the risks that individual and organizations pose to the systems, the networks that they're connecting with. No longer is it sufficient just to identify people based on name and address or a unique technology identifier. It's increasingly critical that you understand much more about them and who they connect with. And there are real advantages from doing that. So one of the big issues on the session today is personal privacy. Having big data solutions that bring together more attributes that have technology running against them in order to understand who is engaging with the network actually provides far greater personal protections in relation to the data. we can see fraud occurring on individuals' data records because we can see changes in their underlying attributes that they might not otherwise have been aware of. We can protect them in the sense so that we can make them aware that fraud is occurring or their data has been misappropriated. We can help firms ensure that they only see the data attributes that they need to see in order to provide the service that they need to provide. So a really easy example is if you go to a cinema and it's an 18-only film, a cinema might check the age on an identity document. They only need to see the date of birth. They don't need to see where you live. They don't need to see all the other bits of identity proof that are on that identity form. So we can provide firms with just the identity attributes they need in order to provide the service they need to provide. So again, providing more protection for the individual. And if I look to the future, actually, the future is very exciting. So we aggregate lots of data together to provide customers and firms with data insight. But in the future, you can see more trusted identity schemes emerging. So it may be that firms no longer hold the data. It's all held by the individual, and it's held in a trusted form that firms are able to access. So you access confirmation that it is a trusted identity rather than seeing even that date of birth or any of the other attributes that sit behind it. So I think big data is changing, but it has absolutely the ability to provide real customer centric solutions because it allows people to access more services quickly and the right services, but it also protects people better because it ensures that the right people are using the right data in the right way. So really exciting conversation. Look forward to getting stuck into it as we go through the session.
Steve, thank you very much indeed for your opening statement. And can I ask the audience to make sure question and answer button at the bottom of your screen to answer any questions, get them in early, because as you know, time flies fast. Mike, over in the States, let's get your opening statement, please.
Yeah, sure thing. So, you know, I work for Microsoft, and obviously as a company that is very well invested in big data, it's something that we work on and do research. So my primary focus is physical security on the internal corporate side. So we're looking for solutions to use the data that our physical security system produces on a daily basis. And, you know, one thing as I started looking at the questions and the topics for this, and I think Steve hit on a couple of really good points, is having a common terminology. So something that we all agree upon, like what is big data? And I think that was the first question I looked at when I looked at this session was, what does it mean? It's one of those topics that gets thrown around as a business word that you just throw big data or machine learning or AI or things like that you don't necessarily understand. But as I look at big data, it can mean different things. It's large data sets that it's hard for someone, an individual or a group of people to comprehend without some sort of business intelligence application helping you. And I think that's the key. So what we've looked at is telling the story with that data, right? So that is the key to consuming and using this data in a productive way, is how do you tell the story with it? And now could be a positive and it could be a negative, because I think you can cherry pick data and you can tell different types of stories or tell a story in a different way using the same data. And I think we've seen that in the recent days with COVID, and I know that's another area of discussion in this, is how has COVID changed it? And you see huge data sets that are being produced around the world that everyone has access to, but you see different countries or different groups of politicians using that data in different ways. And a good example from here in the States is people using two sets of data to tell a different story, right? So you've got people looking at morbidity rates as a percentage of positive or infection, right? So then you've got morbidity rate as a percentage of overall population. So those two things could show different stories, right? One says that the US is doing really well. The other says that the US is doing really poorly. So which set of data do you use? And I think we work with that as well in the physical security world, is how do you tell the story and which data sets do you use? And how do you take that and pitch an idea or use it to take action at a senior leadership level? And the last thing I'll say, we do have experience using this data, using all of the IoT security devices, cameras, card readers, taking all that information and helping us find anomalies and looking for insiders and things like that. But the thing I'll say, looking to the future, is as physical security professionals, my concern is getting in front of quantum computing. And my company, and there's other companies like Honeywell and IBM and Google that are investing large amounts of money into quantum computing. And for a physical security manager, understanding what that's going to mean in the future and how quickly it's going to change how we consume and utilize big data, because it'll go from minutes to milliseconds to consume the entire world's information, right? So how do we get ahead of that? How does that change cryptology and physical security systems and how we protect ourselves? So it's exciting, but it's also can be scary.
Absolutely. Well put, Mike. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, now let's go to James. James, your opening statement, please.
Yes, thank you. And my opening statement consists of looking at data from how the World Economic Forum sees it. Martin alluded earlier to how can we put this into a more sort of general setting, an overview of the subject. And I found this book, if you can see there, The Fourth Industrial Revolution by Klaus Schwab. It's really very good. It gives you an oversight about the subject, a general topic that this is part of. So it looks at the Fourth Industrial Revolution and it emphasizes the importance of collaboration. This is something that many standards do, and ASIS also encourages physical security people to look at collaborating with information security people. And this is at the heart of what good practice is. And yet we don't necessarily use the technology that's available. And what I mean by that is there are lots of technological solutions out there that are available, but we're not investing in them, we're not using them. And countries like South Korea, whatever the statistics, they are unanswerable. 305 deaths compared to UK, at least 41,000. And so whatever statistics you look at, that is irrefutable. And we have to look at why. Is it because South Korea has invested in these kind of technologies for many years because they realized that it was a good idea at the time, and therefore they should be accredited to that, and some people do give them credit? And do we listen and do we take notice of them, or are we too proud to get over there and talk to them, or invite them to come and talk to us about how they've done this? That's my first question. But I would like to, well, I've got 2 more minutes, is to look at the impacts that they raise in the World Economic Forum. They say that it's better and faster decisions, more and more decision making, more real-time decision making. And that's where this technology comes in. Real-time decision making is enabled by big data analytics. So you have analytics on top of the big data. You can't possibly look at all the data that's coming into your control room without the analytical engines, such as are provided by big companies like Micro Focus and the IDLE engine they have. You need something like this to analyze the data and then to provide the control room operator. How could a physical security person understand that there's a cyber attack on their camera, for example, unless the network system alerts them and says there's some issue here? But even more importantly, there's an HR issue. Your person in the control room has seen John from HR come into the building, and yes, he knows he's there, and yet somebody else is saying that John has logged in Düsseldorf. How can they both be there in on the same company? But then you have the opportunity for the physical security control room operator to disengage the VPN, and that means that person in Düsseldorf, whoever it is not able to access the material that's on the company website. So that's another thing. And then, of course, I'll finish with the GDPR, which we can talk about later. But the GDPR is essential because this is where the UK government fell through. They apparently didn't do a data protection impact assessment on our app. I don't know why. I thought they were doing that, but they didn't do one apparently. But that's what we have to do on this technology. And I better stop there because I've got 3 minutes.
James, thank you very much indeed. I appreciate your opening statement. Just to say to the audience, the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen, please. Can I encourage you all to ask your questions early? We've got one more opening statement from Mark, and then I'll come to the questions. So question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. Get your questions in early. Mark, your opening statement, please.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Obviously, I'm nowhere near as knowledgeable on this topic as others. However, I do have an interest in data protection. Now, it's more on the risk sides from what I've noticed over the past couple of years. Is this, but now, actually, let me just go back on myself. I do see some benefits to it. I personally love the idea that we could, we have the capability to do a survey, let's say for argument's sake, of every single security and cleaning client within a country, not just our own clients, other business. It'll be nice to see what they want. I remember a few years ago, our old MD, going back a few years, you know, he'd get us to implement a project across our entire company based upon the feedback of one survey that had been conducted where only 5 clients responded. I would love to have the information from 1,000 clients to see what we could potentially offer to gain more business. I'm sure there are benefits commercially and on the marketing front as well. But like with everything that's got its benefits, there are also its risks. And what I've noticed with anything data protection related over the past few years is even now there is still a massive lack of awareness and knowledge around the subject that could lead to potential issues. James made a brilliant point a moment ago. You know, even the UK government forgot to do a DPIA, you know, and that's just a basic assessment. So that's all from myself for the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And I appreciate your opening statements. Well, we've got questions in already, but bottom of your screen, question and answer button, get them in quickly and we'll endeavour to come. Right, let me come to Steve first, please. Steve, Lewis Werner, it could be, I'm sorry if I've pronounced your name incorrectly, makes a really good point actually, which is the question to you is, got the potential, know it can be good, but what happens when you get it wrong? What do you do then? I mean, and I'm looking at about culpability here, Steve. It strikes me as quite a crucial issue. Steve, your thoughts?
I don't think this question says when you've got it wrong. I think it says propagation of uncertainty, just looking at it. So I think that is a really valid question. And it's one of the challenges firms have at the moment when they're looking to use AI to assist with decision making. So AI is subject to the nature of the build that enables the AI to take place, but also the nature of the data that you feed into the AI. So it can be subject to bias. It can be subject to the wrong decisions. What you need to do is make sure that you've got a way of testing that so that you can go back in and refine your model. With any model, when you build it, you've got to test it, make sure it's actually giving the outputs you expect it to give, and continually to test it and refine it and improve the model. The model gets better the more data you put in. The bigger the data set, the more likely you are to get the right results, and it gets better the more freedom you have to run more sophisticated forms of AI. So machine learning, deep learning, for example, has the ability to provide much better outcome-driven results than to use very simple forms of robotic AI, which are just doing tasks that people would otherwise do. So really interested to hear what Mike said about quantum computing, for example, because the more you go into that space, the more data you can use, the more machine learning you can bring in, and the more accurate your results can be in order to provide the outcome that you're seeking to drive. So lots to be done, but actually it can be done through continuous testing and an improvement of the model.
Mike, let me come to you with the same questions. What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think Steve hit on a really good point there about the bias. The inherent bias, I think, is a huge problem in AI, and obviously, as we move towards quantum computing, and you're going to have results and the ability to consume, digest data in milliseconds rather than even seconds, right? So, I think companies that have gotten ahead of bias in their engineering and research and development, they're going to be in front of this. Like we're looking at statistics about, whether it's facial recognition or other types of AI technology that have bias inherent in it, that it's not picking up people of color or, people that wear glasses or certain things like this that maybe you don't think about as you're developing the application. That bias will then come out at the end. And that's a problem. And I think certain companies have done really well of getting ahead of it, training their staff, having policies around how they develop and how it's reviewed, ensuring that you have a very diverse group that is involved in the development. And I think that's key as we move forward and as it gets more powerful. When quantum computing comes on, we're probably 3 to 5 years from an actual quantum computing solution. We've seen Honeywell has released, they have a qubit program. Google has released theirs. Microsoft is working on it. Once that comes, we're going to have these data sets that are, it's going to be vast and huge, entire world information. And we have to make sure that we don't have bias already programmed into the output before we even started looking at the data.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, James, are you worried about bias in the data?
Well, yes. I mean, but I think you've got to look at the positives as well. And plus, I think if you've got a control room where you've got all this stuff going on, if you've got one of these large control rooms that has this capability, then you should have also people who are mature enough to look at all the different issues and also help you. If you're struggling with the data protection part of it that we mentioned before, you must have somebody who understands that, and that could impact that they've done an assessment of the AI in the first place, because it's a requirement under GDPR that you do a data protection impact assessment on artificial intelligence and on any new technology. So you must have done that in the first place, but not everyone does them.
No, I know it's, and of course this in some ways sort of undermines the sort of faith in the system. And if governments are not doing it, what are the rest of us supposed to think? Mark, I'll just come to you on this issue because it's a big one. You're on the front line there, Mark, and there is that concern right on the front line. Do you experience this in your relationships directly with clients, Mark?
Definitely. Don't go. Some of our clients are brilliant and are all over data protection. They'll dish us out the controller processor agreements. They'll do their own DPIAs. They understand that they need to be, basically produced on a regular basis for anything they do. But then on the other end, we've got clients that don't have much clue at all about their own responsibilities and presume because we're, let's say, the security provider, it all falls under us. And that's obviously not the case. We're the processors on their behalf. However, I am aware there's still a lot of ownership on the processor side as well. But yes, it's mix and match. Half of our clients are all over it, the other half aren't. But we do advise them. We've actually managed to turn some of it into a small bit of cash revenue as well for what we do with our clients on their data protection needs. Okay,
let me come to, believe it or not, I was just saying to the panel before we started this webinar about the love of technology and how we don't have problems with connecting with panelists, and all my questions disappeared. So if you have asked the questions, audience, my apologies, but Hannah in the background, because she's a resource officer, questioned me, sent me Glenn's question, and I'll come to you first, Mike, with this. And Glenn Kitteringham, a former panelist, has put it like this. With all due respect, we have consistently seen over the past 2 decades that tech companies do not have either the skills nor interest in building in security features to properly protect both the devices themselves and the people using devices. Why should we believe anything that each company have to say about protecting the consumer? Mike, this is a sort of a thought leadership. It's a sort of constructive point. It's not a sort of a dig. And I guess the point is, isn't it, that yes, of course, you're conscientious, but there is this, you're in there to make money too. And it's that building of trust. And why should we believe you? Mike?
Well, it's a great point. I mean, I work for Microsoft. I'm a physical security expert. I'm not a technology, I'm not an engineer, a developer. So I'm kind of in a different spot, but I'm also a consumer, right? So I still consume social media platforms. I have an Amazon Alexa in my house, and I have all these devices that are continually collecting all this information. So I have the same concerns. It really does look at the culture of the company. And I think there's some companies that do it well, and there's some companies that we've seen from public relations nightmares that don't do it well, right? Whether it's, companies like Uber or, other companies that have had big, data issues, data leakage issues over the past year or so. I'll say from my experience at our company, I think the culture has shifted over the last 6 years. And you could look at, whether it's a transition in CEO, but it's generally an overall company culture that has shifted into making privacy and data protection at the paramount of what we do. And you can see it in all the required training that the employees have to take. Just the culture, how we speak and how we develop things. It's all about the immense power that we have at this company with all of the data that we're pulling from every different source of revenue, right? Whether it's search, it's Power BI, it's Azure. All these things have immense amounts of data. So it starts with the senior leadership and the culture of the company to make sure the employees understand that this is paramount for our company to stay relevant. Like if all of a sudden Microsoft has a major data leakage issue where we have either a major cybersecurity attack, or there's data left open for someone to see, that's a huge problem for our company. That eats into our trust, our public trust. Maybe someone won't be as open to purchase a Surface device or an Xbox. So you have to take that for every single employee has to have that as an idea that's at the beginning of what they do. Whatever application or service, whatever they're working on, it has to be at the beginning of their thought process.
Steve, I'm going to ask you this question because obviously you're in a similar boat. I mean, why should we trust you?
Well, I'll go back to the start of the question, Martin. I fundamentally disagree with the question. So it says what? We have consistently seen over the last 2 decades that tech companies do not have either the skills nor interest in building security features. Well, we do have the skills and we do have the interest. I'm not sure which firms you're referring to. There have been data release leakage cases that have been well reported on, but there's been a much larger number of non-data leakages. There's been a huge success story around the aggregation and security of data. There's been a huge success story around the ability of data to be used to provide much more customer-centric solutions across the market so that we can do all sorts of things that we do day to day in a much easier way. And lots of success stories in how that's used in the physical security environment. So although I'm talking about tech and big data, I used to be a global chief security officer for a very big global firm operating in 150 plus countries. So I fundamentally disagree with the question. There have been some cases, but firms certainly do have the skills and the interest. And whether individuals want to believe that or not is very much up to them. But actually, as I can speak for our organization, our number one risk objective is to mitigate any risks that relate to personal data issues. And we spend a considerable sum of money, time and effort and skills in order to control that. I personally think that bringing data together actually affords far more protection for personal data than existed previously. What does need to be done, though, is that firms need to actually adapt their models and improve their risk management as their models become increasingly complex, but I see firms doing that. So I think we're in a better position than the question suggests, and I don't agree with the question at all.
Well, good. That's what we want on Thought Leadership. I guess the point is, though, it's not for companies like yours, Steve. I mean, you wouldn't be here unless it was a credible sort of position. That's what we do. But I guess the point is that others will point to is the examples of the Internet of Things. And we've heard on previous webinars, one of the panelists was saying, a lot of the industry has not taken this seriously. There's been some shoddy installations and some shoddy technological performances. And the point is that if we can see it with that, then we've got to be even more worried with big data. This is not about your company. This is about the more general concern. Do you relate to that, though? Can you see why people are concerned?
The ecosystem is becoming more complex. And it was interesting just hearing James call out the difference and the lack of information sharing between physical security and information security. So I used to sit across both and I could see solutions in both, and those were not being communicated across both. And so they only worked in one space. The same exists in relation to the broader ecosystem, the Internet of Things and so on. More and more things are becoming connected in more and more complex ways, and it's critical that people have the solutions, implement those solutions right across the piece. So as your fridge gets used by you in order to make grocery orders, it's essential that the individual that knows how the fridge is built and the technology around that also works closely with the people that are integrating the data that comes off it, and closely with the people that are building products off the data. So the landscape is certainly becoming more complex, and there's really an impetus on and a necessity on individuals in order to communicate better, to share risk insight and to control the risks. And I think where they don't do that, then gaps do emerge.
Yeah, okay, thanks very much. Let me come to you, James, because you and I have spoken about this issue in a slightly different context. And I mean, the point that I think that I'd like to take on this is that concerns about the way technology is being used, at least in other contexts, raises the fear that if we get similar sorts of processes and similar sorts of weaknesses with big data, the implications are so much more serious. Are we justified in being concerned, James?
Yes, I mean, I'm working with the Internet of Things Security Foundation for a few years now, and we're looking at a smart building setup where lots of, you know, homes are being hacked quite easily, but now smart buildings are, or buildings with lots of IoT devices in them. And so we have a right to be concerned because they're not that secure. They can be attacked. We've seen a fish tank, you know, being taken over by a hacker so that they could access millions of pounds for the casino's revenue, or the people that own that data. So that has to be taken seriously. There are other attacks that we've seen. You know, last year there was one in Norway where the aluminium plant was shut down by a ransomware. So the whole place, they couldn't do anything. Even the clock didn't work. So that there are these attacks, so we should be concerned about them. But for me, I think it's what's at the hub of this is what we were talking about earlier about the relationship between physical and cyber, because this is where ASIS recently launched a security awareness standard where they actually said, and I quote, we should be establishing, right, cross-functional security teams to identify cyber-physical risk in the digital smart environment. So unless you actually put those teams in place in a control room, so that's what we've also found in the IoT Foundation, that we have all these attacks, but what are you going to do? You need to have the control room of the future that's got physical, cyber, and all the data coming into it and being effectively dealt with. Whether I know Microsoft are looking at virtual ones, but there are also physical ones. But whatever we do, we have to have this sort of coordinated, collaborative approach, which is what the World Economic Forum puts forward as well, and integrating. And they've been advocating that for years.
Okay, thanks very much, James. Just a quick one with you, Mark. Mark, is amongst your clients, how much faith is there in the use of big data? Or maybe a different way, how much concern is there about how big data will be used?
I'm going to be honest. Some of our clients, like I mentioned a moment ago, some of our clients are all over data protection and they're very switched on with what's going on in the world. A lot of ours aren't. So I guess a great chunk of them wouldn't even be aware of this.
Yeah.
To be honest, when we break things down into like Internet of Things and surveys, reports, legislation, yep, they get that. But it's like, you know, if you look at really, I hate to say this, but technology moves a lot faster than legislation. You know, I personally believe no company wants to lose data, to cause issues, to, you know, to get fined. But sometimes things do get missed. Sorry, apologies there, getting tongue-tied. You know, but sorry, I'm waffling here.
I mean, but is there concern from your clients,
Sorry.
though? I mean, that's the thing, Mark. Is there concern about the use of big data because of concerns about either how it will be used or about how it will be kept safe?
I'm going to break it down. I'd say about 5% would have concerns, knowing their industry and knowing their background. I'd say 95% no concerns whatsoever. But that's through lack of awareness, not through being blasé.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, let me move on because I've got to get through a couple more things. I'm going to come to Steve first, and I'll come to Mike. Because what I didn't know you two actually is you both got a background in physical security. Well, that is very helpful for this question, because in these webinars we've been looking a lot at the world of physical security and security management, the non-technical side, and this question crops up: is to what extent the non-cyber security, the non-CSOs, the security management professionals on the physical side, to what extent they are geared up, Steve, to make the most of this? Are they your weak link in making all this happen? Steve first, then Mike. Steve.
I think there are many weak links. I talk about ecosystems quite a lot, but I think there is a need to educate and collaborate across the ecosystem far more effectively than is happening at the moment. So the examples that have been called out here have been in relation to physical security and information security. You can look at gaps and vertical silos within organizations. So if you go to banks, for example, they'll have fraud professionals, then separately they'll have financial crime or AML professionals. Then somewhere else, if you go to an insurer, they'll have claims fraud professionals, all building vertical hierarchies that are trying to do something around big data and authentication and risk insight. You'll have the same trying to work out who individuals are in operations parts of the business and so on and so on. You've got a whole range of people that are trying to understand who is interacting with the network in what form and what risk they pose. but they're all using slightly different tools, have different levels of expertise, and they're not sharing their skills across the piece. I think absolutely there is a need to educate across the piece in order to deliver much more effective solutions out into the industry.
Yeah, okay. I mean, Mike, are physical security management professionals, are they the weak link in all this?
I don't know if they're the weak link. I think physical security management professionals can sometimes be slow to changes in technology and how that technology can help shape the work that you do. You know, I'm the vice chair of the Physical Security Council in ASIS, and you know, there is a thought process of, you know, the technology and how it's changing, but I always see that some of the older professionals are a little slower to actually use it and to think of new ways to take that data or take the product from the data and put it into their physical security program. And I see that, you know, in my program as well, where you have security managers around the world. They don't really understand how to use big data and how to use, you know, the information that's coming from it. And I think once it becomes easier for them to consume. So for us, you know, getting all of our managers using products like Teams and Power BI and understanding that I can put all this data into something, I can work with the data scientist or a technician, a storyteller, that will then make that data into something that I understand. Because in the past, it's been, you know, these elaborate Excel spreadsheets with crazy pivot tables, and you don't really understand what you're looking at, and you don't understand how it's useful. But once it becomes easier to consume and to understand, I think those managers actually then are like, whoa, this is interesting. I can see, you know, access event records from all over the world, and I can start to see patterns of employee entrance and exit to buildings. And maybe this helps in my response to COVID and how we treat, you know, whether it's asking questionnaire, you know, questions about your health or doing temperature checks. So I see that the way it's gotten better is how the products or the solutions have become easier to consume. The more complicated it is, you're going to see these physical security managers kind of, you know, I don't want this technology. I'm going to stick to my, you know, guards, gates, and guns, as they say, and focus on that. But as it becomes easier to look at and understand, I think you'll see more people incorporating into their program.
Right, thank you very much indeed for that. I'm going to move on quickly. James, I'm going to ask you to be fairly quick because I've got a couple of questions I want to get to. Erica, I'm very grateful actually to Jerry Shields for that question. Erica Gibbons, one of the questions Erica asked is, of course, we now know that data is a big resource. What we also know, and this is also cropped up on a previous webinars, cyber criminals are pretty adept. They seem one step ahead. How worried are you, James, that in staying one step ahead, they're going to be able to exploit this in a way that we can't yet imagine? James, please.
Well, the cyber Pearl Harbor, yeah, the one that's going to be, you know, all the lights go out in America. Oh dear, it was actually a cyber attack, and they beat us. This is a bit scary. This sort of cyber war's been going around for at least 10 years, and I think we're not really ready. I think, personally speaking, cyber peace is the way to go. We need to be far more diplomatic with our rivals and competitors in the Far East and in other places of the world than we are. And we need to take notice of the fact that they could probably wipe us out if we weren't careful. But then, you know, there's not much diplomacy around. There's lots of talk about war. And I'm not sure how prepared we are to deal with it at the moment.
Anyway. James, the words that they could wipe us out sounds send panic stations through at least this presenter.
Apocalyptic tones, Martin.
How worried are you?
Are you ready, sir?
How worried are you about some dramatic big attack that could take us out? How worried? How likely is it?
No, I'm not really worried myself, but I think it could happen, and they should be ready.
And Steve, how worried are you? Just very, very quickly, Steve and Mike. Very, very quickly. How worried are you, Steve?
I'm not worried. I think not worried. I think it can be managed. I can give a long answer on this one, but I won't. But I think that it's easy to be pessimistic, but actually I'm seeing lots of positives.
Mike, very quickly, how worried are you on this?
You know, it's something that's always in the back of your mind, but I don't think you can be too fixated on an entire global, you know, cyber attack that takes everything out. I think there's pieces that might go out, but I think we have redundancy to help us survive an attack like that.
Okay, Mark, I'm going to come a question to you from Charles Olu, very specifically about man guarding. Charles is based out in Kenya, in Nairobi. And one of the questions he's got, and I know this has cropped up before, about the tools that are being used by man guarding on the front line, and the concern that they are generating data which could be manipulated or threatened in some way. Mark, where do you stand, Mark, on that very specific? Right, your home territory.
I don't mind kit and equipment being used for a legitimate purpose if it's needed. Like I quite often see adverts on LinkedIn, because I follow lots of different security companies, where you will get a security company that says, we can put up this mast for you in 3 hours, it's solar powered, blah, blah, blah. I know half of those companies don't even know about the regulations that tie in with that. I have worries about companies using them not without knowing the legislation and the regulations they need to follow. Because they know the person hiring them is the controller, they dismiss their responsibility for it. You know, when this first started with COVID, all the talk about like the temperature readings, the infrared cameras, all for a good purpose. However, there still needs to be the risk of, well, the DPIA is done for that. They need a legitimate purpose for doing that. I don't mind kit and equipment being used as long as it's used for a legitimate means and it's used in the correct manner. And the people that are using it know that.
Thank you very much, Charles, for your question. Mike Gibbs has asked a quick question. I'm just going to come to Steve and Mike very quickly on this. And I'm going to ask you to be very quick because we're running out of time. Is retail loss prevention, Steve, the area that is ahead of the rest in terms of using big data?
No, I would say it's not. So it's doing something, but other places are doing something as well. So and they're all doing different things. So it depends what it is you're trying to measure. But there are, I think much more can be done. I think fraud is very exciting. It can do far more using more data and more AI in order to drive out the opportunity for criminals. But it's doing something, but more can be done.
Mike, same question to you. I mean, there is this sense, I think, in some circles, perhaps in the less expert ones, that loss prevention is ahead of the field here. Your thoughts?
Well, I don't have a ton of experience there, and you know, our retail arm has recently been shuttered, but I think, yeah, I think, like Steve said, there's definitely every vertical in security is doing something with big data. You know, I think that retail loss prevention, there's definitely a great potential for using the convergence of physical and digital data, as James is talking about. You know, looking about your physical presence with your digital presence, do they match up? Do they make sense? And that kind of information, if you can use it in real time, I think that's the key, is how quickly do you get this data, and do you get an alert or a flag, and then do you have the ability to do something about it? And oftentimes you have all this information, all this data, but you generally don't have the end part of it set up, where you don't know what to do and you don't know how to consume it, and you don't have anyone to actually take action. So I think that's the part that, whether it's loss prevention or any other vertical in security, that they need to focus on.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, okay, well, that was an engaging conversation. I learned a lot from that, I'll tell you now. I'm going to ask each of you then, just for your very final comments, just 10 seconds each, if you will. Yes, your final thoughts on this issue. James, the big takeaway for you from this webinar, the thing you'd like to emphasize. James first.
Okay, collaboration is the main thing. It's what the World Economic Forum suggests, and so do ACES and ISC squared. Establish cross-functional teams.
Thank you very much. Not only do they say that, you do too. Thank you very much indeed. Steve, your final comment, please.
10 seconds. That's a tough ask. I've just used 5 of them, but I think as consumers, we've got to recognize that we want more access to more services quicker and more appropriate services. It's mis-selling was quoted earlier as a great example of inappropriate service. To get that, big data has the answer, and it can do it safely, and it can protect personal data at the same time.
Thanks, Steve. Do you know what? I'm not sure the world has got enough of that type of message, actually, to be honest with you. Mike, your final comment, please.
Yeah, I'll just hit on what I just mentioned about if you are using big data to make decisions, you need to do the work ahead of time to figure out what you're going to do with it, and how you respond, and your escalation paths. I think that was the biggest lesson learned for us, was we've got these information, we've got anomalies, and we've got flags. Now what do we do with it, and how do we get that out into the security management professionals that we work with?
Thank you very much. And finally, it seems right to leave a very final comment to you, Mark. Mark, your final point, please. Just 10 seconds.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'll be very quick. Like with anything that I'm involved with, to me, it's people can do whatever they want with any system, with any technology, as long as they have awareness of what they're actually doing and the risks associated with it.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, thank you very much indeed to all the panel for their insights, and indeed you, the audience, for asking questions. What is clear, I think, is that many issues around this, which seem to our experts on the panel to be given, are perhaps not talked about enough. The point that Steve makes about how data can actually protect privacy in its wider use is perhaps getting lost in the argument. And Mike's point that we've got to remember the human element at the end puts in perspective just some of the issues. Well, I'm sure we're going to pick up on all these going forward. My very grateful thanks to the panel. Thanks to BidFest Newman for sponsoring this, and to all the supporting organisations for their help too. Just to remind you, and what a pertinent moment to do so, that when we're talking about the importance of being good at what you do, don't forget, OSPA nominations are still open in Kenya, Germany, the UK and Romania. If you know someone who's doing an outstanding job, now's the time to recognise it. And the Techno-Economic Crime Awards, big cyber element involved in those. Entries are still open until the 1st of September. Please make sure you get your entries if you're involved in the world of economic crime. Finally, just to say, we're going through all again next Tuesday, when we're talking about our financial criminals running amok because of COVID-19. And again next Thursday, when things go wrong, being honest about technology. We've got the conversation about when it goes wrong technology-wise and why that's the case. Ladies and gentlemen, thought leadership is an important part of improving things for the future. Well, whatever happens, we need to make sure we learn the lessons of today. That's the only way of making sure we get a better type of security in the future. My panelists have outlined a whole range of thoughts, and it's quite clear from the chat and from the comments we're getting, they've hit some really interesting points. My thanks to them, my thanks to you, the audience. We'll be back next Tuesday, wherever you are in the world. Until then, stay safe.